Welcome back to Lion Recaps. Today, I am going to explain an American superhero action movie called Iron Man. At the beginning of the movie, a convoy of military Humvees is driving through the mountainous region of Afghanistan's Kunar province. In one of these vehicles, billionaire arms manufacturer Tony Stark is riding along with soldiers on duty. Tony jokes around with the soldiers sitting next to him in the vehicle, who is quite impressed with his personality. Then suddenly the vehicle in front of them is destroyed by an explosion and the terrorists hiding in the way of the convoy attack from all sides. The soldiers get out of the vehicles and fight to defend themselves, but are soon all killed. Tony gets out of his vehicle and takes cover behind a large rock. Moments later, a missile lands near him and explodes. But before Tony sees the Stark Industries logo painted on it, he is knocked away by the force of the explosion and loses consciousness. Seeing that blood starts to flow from his chest, it is clear that the shrapnel from the missile has ripped through his body armor and entered his body. Then we see the Las Vegas scene 36 hours earlier, where we are told about Tony Stark's life story at the Apogee Awards ceremony. As a child, the son of Howard Stark quickly made a name for himself in the world thanks to his sharp mind. Tony is a kid who built his first circuit board when he was 4 years old. Then, at the age of 6, the first V8 engine, and at the age of 17, graduated summa cum laude from MIT. His parents died in a car accident in 1991, but at the age of 21, Tony returned and became CEO of Stark Industries. Now the host of the event, Colonel James Rhodes, announces that this year's Apogee Award has been won by my friend Tony Stark. But Tony is not present at the event and his partner Obadiah Stane receives the award in Tony's place. We then see Tony partying at a casino and Rhodes gives Tony his award. As Tony walks out of the casino, a news reporter named Christine Everhart questions him about the weaponized destruction of his industry. Tony flirts with her in return and the two spend the night together at Tony's oceanfront home in Malibu. The next morning, Christine wakes up to the sound of a computer monitor named Jarvis. It is an artificial intelligence program that controls Tony's home and his research lab. As Christine is about to leave the house, she is greeted by Tony's assistant Virginia Pepper Potts. Pepper then informs Tony about a business deal in Afghanistan. Tony heads to the airport in his Audi R8 sports car, where Rhodes is waiting for him on the plane. On the flight, Tony talks to Rhodes, but Rhodes is unhappy about Tony's late arrival and Tony tries to convince his old friend. Not long after, the two are drunk and watching the flight attendants dance. In the next scene, we see Tony getting off his plane in Afghanistan. Tony then arrives at a military outpost to show off his company's latest project, the Jericho, an advanced super missile system. After the missile demonstration, Tony gets a call from Obadiah and both are happy that the demonstration went well. Refusing to travel with Rhodes, Tony sets off alone in a Humvee with a convoy where he is ambushed at the beginning of the story. In the next scene, Tony wakes up in a cave with a strange device on his chest that is attached to a car battery. He found another prisoner there named Dr. Yinsen. He explains that he operated on Tony but was unable to remove all the shrapnel from his body. Yinsen has created an electromagnetic device that will prevent the remaining iron fragments in his body from traveling to his heart. Just then, the terrorists who captured Tony and Yinsen enter the room and Yinsen translate their language. The men want Tony to make Jericho missiles for them, but when Tony refuses, they torture him by submerging his head in the water. Hours later, members of the terrorist organization 10 Rings bring Tony out of the cave and show him a huge stockpile of weapons made by Stark Industries. Tony seems to give up and starts building missiles, but he has other plans in mind. With the help of Dr. Yinsen, Tony builds a miniature version of the arc reactor using palladium metal collected from missiles, which is similar in design to the giant arc reactor used at his company's headquarters, which can generate enough power output to keep Tony's heart beating for 50 lifetimes, or something much larger for about 15 minutes. And that would be enough to stop the shrapnel from moving further into Tony's heart. Yinsen tells Tony that he used to live in an Afghan village called Gulmira where the 10 Rings attacked and killed his family. Tony then shows Yinsen a design for an armored suit, a prototype suit armed with arc reactor-powered weapons. By wearing it, he can easily defeat the terrorists. Then during work, Raza, the head of 10 Rings, visits there and angrily threatens to torture Yinsen because he thinks Tony is not working on Jericho the way he wants. Tony says to save Yinsen's life that he knows the job and I need him. Raza leaves him and gives them a day to finish the job. Working furiously through the night, Tony completes his project and Yinsen puts Tony in an armored suit, showing him the way out of the cave. As soon as the guards open the cell door, the bomb planted on the inside explodes. When Tony powers up his suit, Yinsen realizes they don't have much time. So despite being stopped by Tony, he grabs a gun and runs away firing to distract the surviving guards. Tony's armored suit is now fully powered up as he runs through the cave as the guards try to stop him. But his iron suit does not affect their bullets and he continues to kill them all. Tony fires a small missile in his suit at Raza, which passes by touching Raza's face and knocking him unconscious on the ground. Halfway through the cave, Tony sees Yinsen seriously injured. Yinsen reveals that he planned to sacrifice himself to save Tony's life. Tony tearfully thanks Yinsen for saving his life, then he dies. Tony comes out of the cave and faces gunfire from the terrorists. In response, he rains fire at the terrorists and destroys all the weapons stockpiled there, but some of their larger weapons start damaging his suit. He then uses a jetpack to launch himself out of the canyon. As they fly, there is a huge explosion in the canyon, but Tony manages to escape. Then, after a short distance in the air, his jetpack stops working, causing him to crash far into the desert. And Tony's armored suit sinks into the desert sand and shatters into pieces. A group of soldiers led by Rhodey rescue Tony. Rhodey is overjoyed to know that his friend is alive. Tony is immediately flown back to America. After arriving at Edwards Air Force Base, Pepper Potts wants Tony to be treated. But Tony says he only wants two things, an American cheeseburger and a company press conference. At his company, Tony humbly appears before a group of journalists and is no longer the arrogant CEO he was before his abduction. Tony then announces the immediate shutdown of the weapons manufacturing division at Stark Industries. At the same time, Pepper Potts is contacted by Agent Phil Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, which is called SHIELD in short. They want to talk to Tony about his kidnapping, so Pepper Potts makes an appointment for him. That evening, an angry Obadiah visits Tony. And he knows that his company's share price and his financial position are going to plummet because of this announcement. Tony wants Stark Industries to move forward with arc reactor technology. But Obadiah believes the arc reactor is nothing more than a publicity stunt. During the conversation, Tony reveals the Mark I device on his chest to Obadiah, but refuses to allow the device to be studied for production. Obadiah tells Tony to rest for a while so he can sort out the company's affairs. In the next scene, Pepper is watching the news about Stark Industries on TV, then Tony calls Pepper into his lab for help. Tony has built an upgraded and much more powerful mini arc reactor Mark II device. But he can't put it on his chest without help, and the Pepper's hands are small enough to fit inside the chamber in Tony's chest. Pepper accidentally pulls out the old reactor's copper wire too early, shocking Tony. And he says I was about to have a heart attack, but Pepper just in time to insert the new arc reactor device into Tony's chest. Tony asks Pepper to destroy the old model of the arc reactor as he has a habit of not keeping old things. Tony visits Rhodey and asks for his help with a new private project of his, but Rhodey doesn't agree with Tony's approach. He believes that Tony is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder due to his imprisonment and needs time to recover. Tony turns to his other best friend Jarvis for help and wants to build a new upgraded armored suit, which he calls the Mark II. The armored suit he built inside the cave was the Mark I. Tony examines the 3D CGI image of the Mark I suit and discards many objects while refining the design. On the other hand, we see Raza, who survived after being seriously injured by Tony's rocket attack in the cave. While searching in the desert, Raza collects all the pieces of the Mark I armored suit that Tony left behind. Tony decided that the first thing he had to do was fix the armored suit's flight system, as the leg-mounted jets proved too unstable. So he makes repulsors for feet and palm stabilizers for balance. Pepper comes in while he is testing the stabilizers because the repulsor throws him backward on his first test. And then Tony discovers that it also creates a powerful repulsion beam that can also be used as a weapon. Pepper Potts leaves a paper-wrapped box on Tony's desk as a gift. Obadiah meets with Tony and reveals that the board of directors has filed an injunction to gain control of Stark Industries. Tony is not at all upset to hear this as he still owns the majority of shares in Stark Industries. After several failed and painful attempts, Tony perfects his flight system and rejoices at the prospect of flying. The production of the Mark II armored suit is soon completed and is much more advanced than Tony's Mark I armored suit. Tony contacts Jarvis and asks to monitor the suit's performance, but against Jarvis' advice, he takes it out for a test flight. Tony is so pleased with the suit's performance that he pushes the limits of flight to greater heights. But due to the freezing air at such altitudes, the suit becomes coated with ice, and its power supply shuts off. Tony barely reactivates his thrusters in time and avoids falling to the ground. Then he returned and landed on the roof of his house. But the armored suit is so heavy that it smashes the 3-story ceiling and crushes off one of his expensive sports cars parked on the ground floor. As Tony recovers from his crash landing, he opens the box that Pepper had placed there for Tony some time ago. Inside it is a Mark I arc reactor with a message written on it proving that it is Tony Stark's heart. Tony analyzes more data and decides to rebuild the suit using gold and titanium from an older project to solve the icing and weight issues. He instructs Jarvis to add some hot rod red trim to the next suit, codenamed Mark III. Then leaves to attend his annual benefit dinner while the new suit is being assembled and painted. At the charity event, Tony meets Agent Phil Coulson, who still wants to know about Tony's incident. Then, at the party, Christine the reporter angrily confronts Tony and tells him about the destruction of Yinsen's home village in the Afghan town of Gulmira the day before. And shows images of Stark Industries' weapons being used by a terrorist group. Tony approaches Obadiah about the matter and Obadiah reveals that he was the one who filed the injunction against Tony. And Obadiah has no qualms about selling Stark Industries' weapons to both sides in the war. Tony angrily rushes home, where he sees the news on TV of the deteriorating situation in the Gulmira area. He tests the modifications on his hand repulsors, turning them into a weapon and detonating several glass panels. When the new suit is completed, it is fitted to his body by an automated robotic system. Tony flies to Gulmira at hypersonic speed, determined to right the wrongs of his company. Terrorists in Gulmira are capturing and torturing civilians and gathering them in one place to kill them. Then Tony arrives wearing his Mark III armored suit and within seconds defeats the first group of terrorists. And using his modern weapons, he saves many innocent people from terrorists without any loss of life. And he throws the leader of the group, Raza's chief lieutenant, in front of the villagers so that they can take revenge on him. He then flies off to find his company's weapons, and suddenly Tony falls to the ground after being hit by a shell fired from a tank. As he gets up, another shell is fired at him, avoiding it, and Tony responds by firing a mini-missile at the tank, destroying it. He also destroys captured Jericho missiles using his designed palm repulsors. After everything is destroyed, Raza arrives there and sees Tony flying in the air. Central Command at Edwards Air Force Base detects Tony in flight, mistaking it for an enemy drone. When Colonel Rhodes is asked about any new development, he contacts Tony. But he remains ignorant and says that he knows nothing about what is going on there. Meanwhile, Tony encounters 2 F-22 Raptors and tries to outrun the jets, but they fire on him. Tricking the planes, Tony calls Rhodes and reveals that he is responsible for the unidentified drone. Rhodes angrily retorts to Tony, "Don't send your amateur stuff into my war zone." Rhodes is horrified when Tony explains that the drone is not amateur stuff but his new invention that contains himself. Tony then hides under a fighter jet to escape the attack. But the movement of the plane loosens Tony's grip and he crashes into the wings of another plane. The plane catches fire, forcing the pilot to eject, but he fails to open his parachute. Tony flies and opens the parachute in time to save the pilot's life. Tony then convinces Rhodes to pretend what happened with the jets was a training exercise. After Tony returns home, Pepper is upset to see the robotic system remove his suit. Tony tells Pepper, "Why are you surprised? You've seen me in much worse situations." Obadiah, on the other hand, visits the camp of the 10 Rings, where we find out that Obadiah is involved with terrorists. He had paid Raza to capture and kill Tony so that he could become the owner of Stark Industries. Obadiah then paralyzed Raza using a very powerful sonic device that causes temporary paralysis. Obadiah then kills all the terrorists and takes the remnants they have gathered of the Mark I armored suit with him. Tony asks Pepper for help and asks him to retrieve all the weapons sold details from his office's main computer so that he can destroy them. To prevent further destruction and save people's lives, Pepper is impressed by Tony's dedication and agrees to do this. She goes into Obadiah's office with a flash drive to copy files from the computer. As the Pepper checks all the files, it finds a terrorist video that proves Obadiah was responsible for Tony's capture. Then suddenly Obadiah walks into the office and sees her sitting in front of the computer, and Pepper is shocked to see him. But she manages to download all the files by controlling herself and cleverly takes out the flash drive, hides it in a newspaper, and leaves the office. But after she leaves, as soon as Obadiah powers up the computer, he realizes what she's been doing. On the way out, Pepper sees Agent Phil Coulson and tells him that he can have his interview immediately so she can get out of there safely with him. Obadiah met his team of developers who were working on a powerful armored suit based on the Mark I. But they failed to build a small arc reactor like Tony's to power the suit. Obadiah angrily shouts that Tony built that arc reactor in a cave, but the chief developer tells him that he is not as talented as Tony. So Obadiah realizes he has another option. He arrives at Tony's house and paralyzes him with a sonic device. Obadiah pulls the Mark II arc reactor out of Tony's chest and tells him that it will be an important invention in the new age of weaponry. After he leaves, Tony realizes that his only hope of survival is the Mark I arc reactor stored in a glass box that Pepper gave him as a gift. He staggers to his workshop and nearly dies trying to retrieve the reactor. Suddenly, his dummy robot picks up the reactor and gives it to Tony, then Tony installs the reactor before Rhodey gets there. Rhodey informs him that 5 agents have gone to arrest Obadiah, but Tony knows that there is not enough manpower to catch him. Rhodey is stunned by Tony's armored suit and asks Tony if he needs any help, and Tony tells him to just keep the skies clear. As Tony takes off, Rhodey notices the silver prototype suit Mark II and then shakes his head, saying next time. On the other hand, Pepper, Phil Coulson, and several other agents arrive at Obadiah's research facility and see the Mark I armored suit there. At the same time, another huge robotic suit powers up and attacks them. Inside this suit is Obadiah, whose code name is Ironmonger. During the flight to the other side, Jarvis warns Tony that he only has 50% power to operate the suit. Because its old Mark I arc reactor was not designed to power the Mark III suit and sustain flight. Just as Obadiah is about to kill Pepper, Tony arrives and throws Obadiah onto the road near Stark Industries with a powerful attack. After saving the lives of innocent civilians, Tony flies into the upper atmosphere and forces Obadiah to follow him. Obadiah also goes high into the air and grabs Tony, but just then his suit starts to freeze like what happened to Tony's Mark II suit. Tony lands a punch on Obadiah's head, leaving him to fall back to the ground. Tony's old arc reactor is also powered down rapidly, and he also lands on top of his factory, avoiding falling back to Earth. Back on Earth, Obadiah attacks Tony again, but Tony somehow disables the weapon tracking system in Obadiah's suit. That stops Obadiah from attacking long enough to give Pepper time to overload the building's arc reactor. Overloading the reactor will generate a powerful electrical wave that will destroy Obadiah's suit. Pepper hesitates because she knows it could get Tony killed too, but Tony tells Pepper to push the button while continuing the fight. When she presses the button to generate power in the reactor releases its shock wave. An electric shock causes the Ironmonger suit to fall into the reactor along with Obadiah, killing him and destroying the reactor. Tony's old mini-arc reactor regains power, which helps Tony survive. The next day, Rhodey holds a press conference about the unpleasant incident between the two robots. Tony is inspired by Iron Man, a name that appears in the newspapers, and plans to adopt it. Agent Phil Coulson writes down some notes on paper for Tony to speak at the press conference. Pepper thanked Phil Coulson but could not remember the full name of the agency he belonged to. Coulson tells him to say the short word SHIELD, asking to get back in touch, and leaves. Tony goes before the reporters again and prepares to speak the words written on paper. But as soon as he starts talking, he throws away his notes and announces that I am Iron Man. After hearing this, the reporters stand up from their seats in excitement. Much later in the post-credits scene, Tony returns to his home and sees a mysterious black man there. He tells him that as Iron Man, Tony has become part of a larger universe. Tony asks, "Who are you?" He turns around and introduces himself. "I'm Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D." The movie ends with him coming to talk to Tony about an upcoming project called the Avenger Initiative. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.